Well, what's going on, folks, man? We appreciate you guys coming out to join us tonight for our seminars. We're back now. We took some time off. We disappeared for a while, for a few weeks, and I think we missed 2 seminars in there, but we're back. This is Friday the 28th.
Sounds right.
Friday the 28th, so 2 weeks from tonight, we'll be right back here at Lake Fork Marina. We're back inside. It is super hot outside. We might be breaking some type of governor regulation, but I don't care. When it's 110, you might break the rules every once in a while.
There's less than 10 of us.
Yeah, for sure.
Two groups.
Yeah, you know, that's it. We are protesting the heat, so it's okay. Nobody can disapprove of a protest. So here we are, man. It's good to be back. I had a great few weeks off. Spent a lot of time. My 2 boys are actually here with me tonight, off to the side, but I got a new guest tonight, Mr. Joe Shipley. How you doing, bud?
How's it going, buddy?
Appreciate you joining us tonight, my man.
Sure, man.
So Joe is kind of new to the guiding out here, but he's been around East Texas and this area and fishing Lake Fork and these other lakes around here for a very long time. And Joe does a lot of night fishing. That's kind of your deal, right?
Oh yeah, I love it. I do it every night.
Every night. So yeah. Joe's big on the night fishing, and we've never really. I'm not a night fisherman. I don't enjoy night fishing, and I know a lot of people do. There's a lot of guys that night fish a lot, and I've had a lot of questions about night fishing. So that's one of the main reasons I wanted to get Joe up here with me tonight. He's a great guy. He's a great fisherman. He's a good fishing guide, and I wanted to introduce you guys to him. And I also wanted to get Joe up here to talk to you guys about night fishing, because it's something that I'd have nothing to offer. I mean, I've done a little bit of it, but none recently. And Joe's up to speed on what's going on right now at night on Lake Fork. So he's going to help us out with that. Yeah. And before we get started on the night fishing, I'm going to kind of lead us off. We're going to talk about fishing docks and fishing some different transition stuff. And some of this dock fishing that we're going to talk about is going to correlate directly to what you're going to talk about, I'm assuming. Oh, yeah. Because I know those green lights are a major factor in that night fishing, and all those green lights are around docks.
Well, right now it's more super white lights and orange lights. They've moved away from the green lights.
But it's docks.
Yeah, it's docks.
If there's lights, it's docks.
Oh, it's docks. I mean,
so, see, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm even on the wrong color lights at folks' nights. I don't know anything about night fishing, but there's going to be some docks around there. So we're going to talk about what's going on right now on Lake Fork. Is a lot of weather change, a lot of water temperature change. That's super hot today, but yesterday it wasn't. And the night before it really wasn't. And it was cloudy, and we got a lot of cool water dumped into the lake with that tropical system that came through. And the water temp dropped a lot, and it pushed a lot of bait fish extremely shallow. Well, anytime you get towards the end of summer and you get a lot of bait fish start pushing shallow, it's kind of like that spring deal. They don't really just go back to the main lake the next day. Like, once they kind of push, they kind of stay there. So we've started some of that transition. Those offshore big schools of fish, they are now broken up. You're not going to find those mega numbers of fish offshore for a little while. So we're going to talk about transitioning fish, what type of areas we can fish. I know we talked about that last Wednesday. I wanted to do it here live with y'all so you guys can ask some more in-depth questions about it, and we can really dive into transitioning structure. And my favorite piece of cover for transitioning fish is docks. There's no better stop sign or transition spot than a dock. Nope. It's a perfect temporary home. So we're going to talk about that in depth tonight. That's what's going on. We got these big schools. They broke up. Some of these, the bait fish are really pushing far back into the creeks already, getting really shallow on the banks. You'll see them. Like, if you get up in the dirt in the morning, or even in the middle of the day, 1, 2 o'clock, you get up shallow, you'll see a bunch of, especially the smaller bait fish, you'll just see them flipping around everywhere. And they're not really being chased yet. They're not, like, fish aren't schooling on them. And I have customers all the time on my boat, and they'll see a shad flicker. They go, oh, they're schooling. I'm like, no, that's just a shad happy to be a shad. Like, when a shad just goes up there and slaps his tail and pops the water, he's not really evading a predator. He's just a shad being a shad. When a shad is evading a predator, when it's a small shad, usually you'll see like a burst of them. A burst of them will wake or even pop out of the surface of the water. A gizzard shad will kind of porpoise a couple times, 1 or 2 times. So that slapping, popping sound that you hear all the time when you're fishing these fertile lakes that are full of life, that's not bait fish really evading predators. That's just a shad being a shad. Now, it's good to have that in your area that you're fishing, but it's not like, hey, let's cast over there, we're going to catch one. That's not the case. But you do see a bunch of those smaller bait fish right now, and I'm talking about in very shallow water, 1 to 2 foot of water. This week, after the end of this week, the last couple of days after what happened the other night. So as that happens, those bass have got to follow them in there. Those bass have got to push back, and it's always usually the case where the bait fish usually kind of beat the bass to it, and the bass just kind of follow the bait fish, right? Like, if they close this restaurant down, but they open up one down the street, they'd probably be open before we got there, but it wouldn't take us long. We'd be there in a minute. You know what I mean? Like, That's kind of the same deal. So what you're looking for when this is happening is in that time period where fish are moving around, you got to find something that's going to create a temporary home for these fish that maybe they'll pause. Because if you're just looking for spread out fish that are moving in and out, boy, that's hard to find a one fish here or one fish there. But boy, if one will pause here for a minute and then another one will pause here, now all of a sudden you get 3 or 4 or 5 gathered up, now you've increased your odds of catching a fish. Everything we do in bass fishing, we're looking for giants or groups. Us guys that fish every day, that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for a bite. We're looking for either one giant bite or we're looking for groups of fish. And the way to find that is dominant pieces of structure and cover. Because big fish are going to go to the dominant piece of structure or cover, and groups of fish are going to gather on the dominant pieces of structure and cover. So my favorite thing is docks for cover. Now, what I really like to have is I like to have kind of it's like a little number system. So as you're pulling into a creek arm or a pocket, if you've got a little subtle point, I'll give that a point, right? Like I'm giving that a score of 1. And then if I've got a creek channel that swings up against that point, now I've got 2 factors, so that's got 2 points. If it's got a dock, a creek channel, and a point, like, okay, now we got 3, and we're, oh man, hold on. Batten down the hatches, power pole down, let's go, spot lock, whatever you do. But that's what you're looking for. You're looking for as many good things as you can. These are what I'm calling transition points and stop signs. Some of these transition ones are harder to find because they can be subtle. If it doesn't have to hold a big group of fish, remember, fish aren't grouped up, they're spread out. If it doesn't have to hold a giant group of fish, then that means something very small can hold 3 or 4 or 5 fish, which is all you're really looking for at this time. You're just trying to put a little bit more odds in your favor by finding those small groups. So pay attention when you pull into these pockets and coves and creeks, or when you're looking on your Navionics, pay attention to these smaller points. Like if you see any kind of a shoreline point and you see that creek channel running up next to it, you might go take a little look at that, fish around a little bit, look, see if there's some bait around, see if there's some life, whatever. But I really love docks. And the reason I love docks, because docks, when we're talking about summer to fall transition, we're talking about low oxygen. We're talking about the hottest water of the year, just coming off the hottest. These fish have been hot for a long time. And what do docks offer that more so than anything else?
Shade.
Shade, exactly. Perfect. Man, you guys are smart.
Oh, yeah.
Smarter than these two, I know that. The smart one actually got mad when I said that. Did y'all see that? He's like, hold on, dog. He's like, I can read better than you can. So, yeah, shade is a big deal this time of year because the oxygen situation. These fish are lethargic. They're tired. They're as beat up as they get. They're looking for a nice place to chill for a minute, especially as they move around. And that's why I love docks. You know, people ask me all the time, do I fish docks on Lake Fork? And I say, well, you know, yes, I do. But I only fish docks that correlate to structure. And for 90% of the year, that's true. This is the one time a year where I will really focus on docks because of the oxygen situation and the fish transitioning. And when oxygen levels get low, fish tend to push shallower. The bass tend to push shallower when the oxygen levels are low. So this is the one time a year when I really will go after docks hard. So that being said, a dock in and of itself, at the right position at the mouth of a creek or halfway back in a creek or at mouth of a pocket, a dock in and of itself with nothing else on it can actually be a really good stop sign or transition point that we're talking about. You don't necessarily have to have the creek channel and the actual point structure for a dock to be good. If it's the right dock and has the right depth on it, maybe it's got a little bit of brush on it or something, it can be really good this time of year. So let's talk about dock fishing principles. I grew up fishing Lake Conroe, and if you know anything about Lake Conroe, 2/3 to 3/4 of that lake, dock fishing is all there is. It's seawalls and docks. There's not even a lot of like dynamic structure. There's not a lot of elevation change, stuff like that going on in Lake Conroe. So I had to learn when I was his age to fish docks, you know, and to be really proficient at it. And what I found through my entire lifetime of fishing docks is I prefer to start out and work in. Okay. I've heard this talked about the other way where you want to go to the deepest, darkest shade you can right off the bat and try to catch the biggest fish first. I can kind of understand that. My deal is on a given day and throughout the day, depending on the angle of the sun, the fish will move around under that dock and position differently. And maybe there's a brush pile on the outside, but there's not up there in that dark shade, so maybe they're holding out here. Like, you never really know until you fish a dock a bunch, or until you fish it that day, exactly where the fish are going to be holding. For that reason, I don't want to kind of cut to the inside corner and skip way back up in the middle of the dock and maybe miss these fish that are sitting on the outside post. So I always fish a dock out to in. I always point my boat into the wind if I can. If there's a way for me to point the nose of my boat into the wind, that's going to help me from getting pushed up too close to the dock. Hey, what are you doing? All right, calm down. All right, calm down over there. There's some video gaming going on, I think.
Yes, sir.
But I always start from the outside and point the nose of your boat into the wind. That keeps you, because if you point your nose into it, you can run your trolling motor into it. It keeps you from getting pushed into the dock and getting too close to it. I'll make my first couple casts on the outside edge and then kind of work in from there, skipping under the dock a little bit further as I go. Then I'll work down one side and kind of skip under on that side. And always I'm working out to in. So even when I move around to the side, I'm going to pitch to the outside of the dock, then go up under further underneath it. So just always thinking that out to in principle is probably the number one tip I can give you when you're dock fishing. As far as bait selection goes, you know, it just depends on how fast you're wanting to fish. If you're new to dock fishing, or you're new to dock fishing on a particular lake, like if I'm going to, never been to Cedar Creek. Cedar Creek's got a lot of docks. If I'm gonna go to Cedar Creek and I'm gonna try to find some dock fish, my first baits that I'm gonna wanna throw it off the bat are gonna be moving baits. I'm gonna throw square billed crankbaits, medium diving crankbaits, something I can bounce off the pilings. I'm gonna throw swim baits. I'm going to throw things that I can fish proficiently and efficiently and be weedless and snag free around those docks, but still cover water fast. Because the deal is, until I find a couple fish and find a couple docks that are holding fish, I need to cover them quick, right? Because if you go to pitching a finesse jig under the first dock, you know, for me to fish a big dock with a finesse jig, that might be 30 or 40 minutes if I'm going to fish it properly. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Like if I'm going to hit every angle and every post and every and I'm really, when I first pull up, I don't know where the fish are holding. Remember that now. So I've got to fish the entire dock. Now, once I get a couple bites, okay, let's say that I'm fishing that crankbait or that swim bait, and I get a couple bites on the shadier corner, say it's on the left side. I get a couple bites on the left side about halfway back on the dock. Well, now I can pick my finesse jig up and still cover water, because now I can pitch that one area of that dock. 5 minutes, boom, on to the next one, 5 minutes. So once you get a couple bites in a certain position on a dock, usually the fish are mostly going to be positioned in that type of area. And then as the sun angle changes, it may change. You may have to reassess that throughout the day. But usually with dock fishing, it's really patternistic. You can really pattern the fish as far as where they're positioning, where they're holding. So, any questions on dock fishing so far?
Once you found that fish, how long do you beat that thing out?
So once I get, like, if I get a bite on a dock, let me clarify the question. Are you asking me if I get one bite on a dock, how long will I spend on that dock?
Right.
So on the first, until I get 2 or 3 or 4 bites, I'm gonna fish the entirety of that dock, which is gonna take me a long time. Now, if I'm fishing it with a moving bait, I can do it in about 10 minutes. If I'm fishing it with a shaky head or finesse jig or something like that, then it's going to take me about 30 minutes if it's a bigger size dock. But I'm going to fish the entirety of the dock until I have, okay, I've gotten at least 2, usually 3 or 4 bites. Now I know if I've gotten those bites and they're all kind of in the same section of the dock, I'm only going to fish that section of each dock I pull up to now. I'll be a little more thorough in those sections. Like if I were to go fish a dock, let's say I've gotten 3 bites and I've gotten them all in the back left corner. And I've been fishing, I fished that crankbait and I got my first bite on the crankbait, and then I slowed down on the next one and got my second bite on a shaky head. And then third and fourth bite was shaky, one was shaky head, one was crankbait. So now every dock I pull up to, I'm going straight to that back left corner, and I might throw that crankbait and try to get a reaction bite, but I'm gonna throw multiple baits in there. I'm gonna be real thorough. I'm gonna pick every section of that back left corner apart really thoroughly to try and milk everything out of that dock. So that's all. I mean, those type of questions are really hard to answer, because at the end of the day, some guys fish faster than others. I'm not the fastest fisherman on the earth. I don't cover the most ground of anybody. Jonathan Bowling, young guy, he'd be burning through them a lot faster than I would. And it's not that either one is wrong. For years we've watched fishing, and you see KVD do what he does, right? But then you see guys like Greg Hackney and what's the old guy that flipped, Denny Brower. You see these other guys that slow down and pick everything apart and fish real methodical in one area. But KVD is like doing this, man, all the time. And he's covering water. So, Uncle Zach's here. We in trouble. Look, my son. Even my son's like, yep, we in trouble now, boys. So it's not that one speed's better than the other or worse than the other. I think a lot of that when you're talking about how long you, I've heard this before a million times. I mean, I've been asked this so many times. How long will you give an area without a bite before you leave? Well, man, that depends. It's going to depend on how many fish I see on my electronics or how confident I am there's fish in that area, how many fish I think are in that area. Like, it all depends. And really what it depends on more than anything is your instincts. And the more time you spend on the water, the better your instincts are going to be. The more trial and error you have. One of my biggest keys to learning how to fish offshore. So I grew up not really fishing a whole lot offshore, but when I moved here in 2009, this lake got to an all-time low in 2011. Best thing that ever happened to me. It taught me how to run the lake and see where all the stumps were, and I got to learn how to navigate Lake Fork. But what it forced me to do was it forced me to fish offshore because there was nothing on the bank. The bank was all bare bank. All the fish were offshore unless they were spawning. And so it forced me to fish offshore. And the number one lesson that I had to learn during that time was, I might pull into a shallow area that I have confidence in, and I might spend an hour and a half in there, and maybe I didn't get a bite, maybe I only got a bite or two, but I spent that time in there because I was confident those fish were there. It's the same thing with offshore fishing. It's the same thing with dock fishing. Once you have the confidence that those fish are there, and you'll be more patient to pick it apart, you'll get that extra bite or two, or you'll get that one to bite that triggers the others to bite. And that was the biggest thing I had to learn offshore was to actually, I would pull up there, see them on my graph, throw a cast or two of this bait, cast two of that bait, not get bit, and I'd bail. Well, they're there, and then I learned over time that when I kind of by accident stayed there longer, then I got a couple bites, then all of a sudden they started biting, then I caught 15 off that spot, or 5 or whatever. But that was one of the hardest. So it's all about your instincts. And the more trial and error you get on the water, the better your instincts get. It's a real cop-out answer, and I'm really taking a long time to give you a cop-out answer. But the deal is it's up to you how long you spend on a spot. Listen, if you're on a spot and in your head you're not going to catch them there, you need to go. Because guess what? If in your head you're not going to catch them there, you're not going to catch them there.
So if you're sitting there and you're fishing and you're thinking, this is crazy, why am I here?
Yeah, this ain't going to work. Like if you get that feeling, we all know that feeling when we're fishing, that feeling of, man, this ain't happening. This just ain't happening. Bail. Be that guy that runs and guns. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of guys that made a lot of money fishing that are like that run and gun and pull the plug a bunch and pick their trolling motor up 20 times a day. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of guys that have made their living doing that. So at any time when you're fishing, that's the number one answer. I guess the best answer, I've kind of worked it out in my own head. Y'all are getting to see my head unfold right here live action. But I guess the real answer is if at any time in your mind you get spun out and you're like, this ain't happening, then it ain't happening, and go. That's probably the best way to answer that, I guess, or the best way to look at that. There was something else I wanted to get to on these some of these transition points, but that's okay. So, all right, any other questions on dock fishing? Just straight dock fishing.
Do you ever flip a frog on a dock?
Yes, I will. So what we were talking about earlier where the bait fish are flickering, there are times when you'll hear, and if you're lucky enough to get the right angle, you'll see some surface activity under a dock. If that is going on, or I have an extreme thermocline situation where I've got a thermocline, some of these smaller lakes, you might get a thermocline up in 10 foot of water. Well, when that happens, that's going to push everything real high. So, but yeah, so if I see surface activity or hear it under a dock, for sure I'll take a frog, because the frog will skip under dock real good. It's snag free. You can throw it up there. It wraps around a piling. You just pull it out and it comes right out. That's a beautiful thing about a frog. You can throw it anywhere. It's coming back. You tie it on a 65-pound braid. It's coming back to you. It's getting home. But yeah, no, frogs under docks are real good.
Well, like you said, it's one of the easiest baits to skip out.
It skips so good. One thing I will say, if you're going to dock fish with a frog, you need to downsize your rod a little bit. Because when we fish some of these pad fields and hydrilla mats and pondweed, like that stuff is so dense and so thick, I throw a frog a lot on like a really big rod. It's called a 7.6 heavy, but it's like an extra heavy. The one, it's a Lux Series 6-inch rod. It's super heavy, super stiff, just lots of torque. But I do that so that I can handle a 7-pounder in all that mess. I can't skip a frog very well because a frog's pretty light. I can't skip a frog. If you're to skip a bait, one of the principles of skipping a bait is you got to be able to load that rod a little bit. When you swing that bait, that rod's got to have a little bit of parabolic bend at the end of it to really get the whip you need to skip that bait up under there. So maybe go down to like, you know, something a lighter heavy, like the 7.3 heavy that 6-inch makes is a lighter heavy than the 7.6 heavy is. You know, all rods are a little bit different. And so I would just look for that right rod. It's a feel thing where you can really get that whip and that bend in the end of that rod when you roll cast it to get it up under there. If you throw it on your normal frog rod that you pull out slop with, you're gonna have a mess on your hands, especially with braid. You know how when you backlash braid, it ain't playing, Jack. Like it comes to an immediate stop with braid when it backlashes. Any other dock questions? Those are good. Young guy over here, THSB angler. Y'all know you got some questions. No, he's like, nah, I got it. He's like, I'll be pitching and skipping since I was 3, dog. What you talking about? Like, son, I learned how to read a graph before I knew how to read a book. That's how these high school kids are now, man.
I wish I was that way.
They're stupid good. It's so crazy how good all you young guys are now. Like, I knew how to drag a worm and throw a spinnerbait because Dad only let me throw things with one hook on them. So I didn't hang them up. You know?
I'm not good at fishing.
Yeah. You're not good at fishing?
Not really.
Right.
You're right. You're really not that good at fishing. I'm not going to lie to these people. That's all right. We'll get you there. We'll let you go with Uncle Zach. You'll be throwing a wacky worm like a champ tomorrow. All right. Well, let's talk about some night fishing, Joe. I mean, I know that's what you do and that's what you came here to talk about. And I'm probably going to ask more questions than all these guys combined because I guarantee you I've got some questions about night fishing. I don't do that much of it, and I'll probably sit here and pick your brain on how what I'm talking about with docks relates to what you're talking about, and we'll just get after it. So tell us the night fishing deal. How are you going about night fishing? What are you doing, or what's your game plan on it? Like tonight, what's your game plan?
Okay, so mine does a lot like with you. So when I fish docks, I make sure I find a creek to come through.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so if you find an 18-foot creek, and I'm fishing docks 12, 13 foot of water. But I'm fishing only docks with light and brush. And that's that whole equation.
So you got kind of the same
Yeah,
point system.
So
I mean,